Gotta love the music. Great. Well, thanks, Matt. That was a good introduction, and I think sums up fairly well where we're headed with the statewide water supply initiative this time. As you can see from our slides here, which is not a bait and switch, but everything does tie back to the water plan. So as Matt had said, a lot has happened since the last update to the statewide water supply initiative, and we are doing our best to make sure that this is really a cohesive whole, that all the water planning that we do in the state really makes sense through the lens of the water plan, and that we incorporate all the local efforts that are out there. So we'll go through a little bit more detail today. We'll try to keep it fairly high level, not dive into a lot of the technical details. We do have a lot of folks from the technical team here. Matt is our main project manager of the technical team, and a lot of other good brain power in the room and otherwise at the conference. So we'll do our best to answer any questions you have, and always happy to talk to you offline as well. So here's where we're going today. This is probably everyone's favorite breakfast topic, I would think, perhaps, maybe today. But, SWSI has been around for a long time, but we will talk about the history of where the statewide water supply initiative came from, some of the other planning efforts in the interim, and then where we're headed with planning with the current analysis, how things are playing out, how they're different from what we did last time. And then really the focusing on the rollout, how we're getting this information out to you, especially now that we're getting into the thick of the number crunching, on the cusp of actually having some of this data to release to you, what the plans are for that whole outreach process. And then we do have a survey. We are going to spare you the polling in the room with the Poll Everywhere software, so we're not going to ask you to bring out your phones this time and do it. It's on the screen, but we do have a survey that's going live today that we encourage you to use your phones, computers, whatever you have, either right now at the tables or otherwise today or whenever you can get a chance. But it's just a simple 7-question survey we'd like to get feedback on. So this is really the why of, why are we doing this? I think it probably goes without saying to a lot of folks in this room. People know kind of where we're at, as a state with water supply planning issues. This, of course, is a diagram many of you have seen, many times. Division of Water Resources, kind of the snake diagram is what we call it. But just showing that we have a whole lot of variable hydrology, a lot of major rivers as the headwaters state, and of course a lot of consumptive needs, agricultural needs, municipal needs to meet, as well as environmental and recreational needs. Balanced, of course, with obligations to downstream states, to the 9 different compacts and equitable apportionment decrees that we have to deal with throughout the state. So all of that paired with extremely variable hydrology and changing conditions, as we all know, makes for a challenging planning environment. So back to the water plan, the solution to this, as the water plan was published in 2015, was to come up with a whole suite of different measurable objectives, really focusing in on the things where we can make an impact. The things where we can really address some of these needs and make baby steps, and breaking that out into these major categories. So this is what we have to work with. Everything, again, we are trying to work through this lens of the water plan. So I think it's always valuable to look back and look at the history, kind of put this in the context of where we've come and why we are where we are. If you look on the left side of the screen there, the squiggly line, I think it's always important to note that this is not a new thing. Yes, the statewide water supply initiative really grew out of the drought, 2002 legislation that was passed. The state kind of stepping back and saying we need to get a better handle on supply and demand issues. But CWCB has been around since 1937. A lot of your other organizations, major conservation districts, conservancy districts, have been around as long, or in some cases longer, irrigation companies. So there's been obviously a lot of work going into water supply planning in the state all along since the inception of the state. And so a lot of that good work has set the foundation for where we are now, and we always need to make sure that we understand kind of the context of where we're at with that. That being said, of course, the more modern efforts, at a statewide level anyways, have started 2004, 2005 with the statewide water supply initiative. More recently, we've had the water plan. Of course, the Colorado Water for the 21st Century Act came in, setting up the roundtable process and the Interbasin Compact Committee. And then the water plan coming along is really another major milestone to really wrap a lot of this up. Again, trying to make sense of this into more of a cohesive whole. And now, circling back, we're getting into updating kind of the technical foundation under that, which is this statewide water supply initiative study. Do want to point out that 2017 ripple effects report, the big image here, that a lot of our staff put a lot of hours and intense work into, is a really great summary of water plan implementation efforts to date. So there's been a lot of questions about, okay, what are we doing to actually implement the water plan? And there are a whole lot of very concrete things that we can point to that particular report does a very good job of illustrating. So just wanted to point folks to that because that's a great resource. So today, of course, we want to talk about what's next and again, how we're tying this together. So this is our water planning cycle. We've got the three big things that have very much evolved in the last 15 years or so. The three big things being the water plan, the statewide water supply initiative, and the basin plan. So of course the water plan being the big policy thing, wrapping it all together. The statewide water supply initiative really being the supply and demand study, the technical background, and the basin plans being the local aspect of that, the implementation, how are we going to meet those needs? What are those lists of projects? How do we fund those projects? How do we actually move things forward? And so this is, one of the ways that we're trying to illustrate this is really tie this together, again, under the umbrella of the water plan. It's all part of one big circle of what we're really working on here. But I don't know if this is terribly appetizing at this hour of the morning, if you like SpaghettiOs or not. At least we have bacon. Brown and Caldwell came through with the bacon, thankfully. But we have so many acronyms. I think that goes for most industries, most groups. But this is one of the things as we go into this process and try to make sense of where we're at, where we come from, where we're going. We want to make sure that we really follow kind of the path that the water plan was on to really reach out to maybe a broader audience, to make sure people understand our water supply issues in the state. That it goes above and beyond the folks that attend Water Congress, that it's not just the IPPs and the SWSIs and the CWCBs and all these other acronyms that we have, that we can maybe move beyond some of those. So we are, that being said, we are considering changing, again with this kind of rebranding, changing some of the naming conventions around some of this. So stay tuned for where we're headed on that. And again, another piece of kind of this bigger cycle is looking at the different aspects and kind of what these things are, how we work on the analysis, the scientific piece, how we continually evolve, get better data, better information, better technical expertise that we can come to bear on any of these issues, and how we continuously update that, and how we are certainly implementing projects, implementing other actions, other funding sources, other things that we can do as a state agency, and of course working with the whole host of partners across the state. And of course it goes without saying that 99% of the implementation of the Colorado Water Plan is done at a local level. So very much working with all of the districts, all of the irrigation companies, all of the NGOs and environmental groups throughout the state. There's a lot that goes into this, and this is all just trying to make sense of it and really make sure that we're as coordinated as possible. So the trick this time around was to implement, again, a further evolution of our planning process, and to really use hydrologic modeling tools that we've developed as a state. So for about 25 years, we've been partnering with the Division of Water Resources to develop Colorado Decision Support Systems, the CDSS modeling tools. So the decision was made, as part of the water plan and the whole process moving forward to really move into a modeling analysis this time around. Along with a scenario planning analysis. So this very much grew out of the work that was published in the water plan, that kind of grew into the water plan, a lot of the discussions with the roundtables and the Interbasin Compact Committee. A lot of effort went into the thought process on scenario planning. This is not new, of course, many other entities are doing this. But instead of just looking at one future, looking at many different futures that are out there, and some of those different drivers and how you can play with the various aspects of things that affect the future. Things like different population growth levels, different potential climate impacts on hydrology, and how you can turn some of those levers and really try to get better data, a wealth of more scientific data throughout the state. So that's what we're doing this time. Given the additional complexity, given how it's very different than last time around, it's not an easy process. So it's been tricky. It's taken a while. Even just developing these methodologies was something that took many months, better part of a year. And to do so, we needed to reach out through a stakeholder process. We had technical advisory groups, a number of folks from roundtables, some academics, a number of people who are subject matter experts to really help us develop what these different methodologies are, what the most appropriate ways to do this new modeling, especially in the context of the scenario planning, are, and to make the most sense of it all. Of course, that's very different from the image that you see on the left down there, what we had called the wedge diagram. The much simpler way, if you will, still very valuable, and had a lot of impact on our water process, planning process throughout the state. But again, as we have these new tools, I think there's a lot more that we can do to move forward. So quick illustration kind of on how things are a little bit different. Back to the 2010 SWSI study, we had fairly simple, demands, low, medium, and high, and then a whole suite of different projects. So we had the projects factored in there, did the simple math to calculate what the gap was. And the project success rates were a part of that. These percentages are taken from a statewide level. They actually varied by basin, but it was kind of the best guess based on the projects that we knew at the time. However, we didn't really have the opportunity to consider the water rights side of things. So on the agricultural side, even on the municipal side, of course, we did not do a modeling effort. So we were not looking at the hydrology at all. And then on the environmental recreational side, we were mapping areas of importance. So we had some great work that was done with the local roundtables, but we didn't look at areas of flow needs, of where flows were higher or lower, how that might affect the needs that are out there. So kind of a very high-level dive into kind of where we're headed with the modeling analysis this time around. And some folks have been exposed to this, others have not. This is very similar to work that we've done on any number of other studies that, of course, we're really bringing into this project this time around. This happens to be from the Colorado River Water Availability Study that CWCB did a couple phases of over the last 5 or 10 years, looking at flows in the Colorado River Basin, looking at different hydrologies, different climate change impacts, and being able to see how that really can change the hydrograph. So having, of course, as a model, having different nodes in the model where where the water's coming off the river system, where it's coming back, where those return flows are, all the water rights, all the operations. You can really dive into a fair amount of detail. Of course, as a model by definition, it's not perfect. Things are calibrated as well as they can be. It's only as good as the input data that you have. But as a state, we're extremely fortunate to have very good data and a lot of effort that's been put into these models over the years. So this is back to the scenarios that we have, again, developed by the roundtables and the IBCC, by our board as well had a fair amount of input into this, where things settled, and again, this was published in the water plan, was these 5 different scenarios that we have here. And all of those tie to these different potential futures out to the year 2050. And the point being, you can't just draw a straight line, kind of put some sideboards on it, some high, medium, low, that there hopefully is more utility in kind of racking our brains a little bit and thinking about some of these different potential, all equally plausible future scenarios. And our job this time around was to take those scenarios from what was very much a qualitative narrative description of these potential futures. A lot of work went into kind of hashing those out, and pros and cons, and it's not designed to be any better or worse than any other scenarios. But our job now is to take each of those scenarios, each phrase, as those have been characterized, and try and quantify that. So look at the data that we have, look at the levers that we have, where we can change things up and down, and again, how to make sense of that from a scientific standpoint. We do have fact sheets, and again, we're happy to take questions and of course talk more offline. At our display out in the hallway, we do have a number of these fairly simple, just 2-page fact sheets on the various aspects of what we're doing this time around. So feel free to grab those. I'll walk through just a couple of these, just to give you a quick example. Russ has done a wonderful job. He's responsible for the presentation and a lot of the good work that's happening on this as he's taken over the project management of this. So I'll give him a chance to speak in a minute here. But one of the things that Russ will go through, excuse me, is how we are rolling out, different aspects of the data as we get things in. So starting in December, and ideally monthly from January through June, with the final release of the report next year in July of 2019, we're going to start releasing pieces of this. So all that to say that the population piece will be one of the first things we'll release in December. This shows, very simply that the methodology for the population analysis was to break things out by different types of county. So by the urban counties, by kind of the mountain corridor counties, and then by the more rural counties in the state, and how those played out, again, with those different narratives that we had from the scenarios, where they were kind of bumped up or down based on what was said in those scenarios. And so that's kind of a good proxy for all of our analysis, how we had to take kind of where it said things were hotter and drier or wetter, or where people were concentrating in urban areas and kind of there was a lot more infill, or where there was more growth out in the suburbs. This is the way that we were interpreting that. This is, of course, based on the State Demographer's Office data. We do have projections out to 2050 from the State Demographer, which we did not have actually for the 2010 analysis, which makes things more straightforward on that end as well. And then on the environmental and recreational side of things, again, we did not really tie things back to flows in 2010. We had some work that was done in a few different areas in the Colorado Basin and the Yampa with what was called the Watershed Flow Evaluation Tool. We are leveraging some of that work this time around and really creating a new tool, but basically using outputs from the bigger modeling effort that we're doing this time around. From all the modeling for each of those different scenarios, to be able to compare the flows at certain nodes within the basins to show where things are relatively speaking, wetter or drier, and how that impacts certain environmental attributes. And so to at least be able to see what some of those potential impacts are without being prescriptive, but just to be able to really display kind of the different potential futures that we're looking at. And then the costing module, we are working on what we hope will be a valuable tool moving forward. One of the things that we really need at the state level is better coordination and better information, better data about project costs. So one of the big pushes for the Basin plans was to get information about planned projects, to know, especially for a funding standpoint, funding needs, what is out there, what do we need to do as a state to meet all these needs that we've identified. And long story short, of course, we got a lot of great work that was done with the Basin plans, but there's still a long ways to go. We still have a lot of needs, especially on the costing side, to really fill in the blanks and better understand what those needs are, where those needs are, and then, of course, how we can pivot and try to meet those needs with funding solutions. So the costing tool is our first attempt to do that. We're trying to leverage the data that we have, of course, on projects that have been funded before that many of you have worked on. We have a lot of information, but we still need more. So we hope to release a draft of this tool in December as well. That really is kind of factored on all these unit costs, all the things that go into the projects, and of course there are many unique things for any given project, but the tool itself has a number of different ways of inputting that information. So at the same time, it's designed to give us better costing information, be used as a tool for you to get some kind of high-level engineering costs on any given project, as well as to help us really gather some of that information as well, and then continuously improve that tool. So hoping it will be useful. We're basing it to a large extent on some work that's been done in other states, primarily in Texas. They have a unified costing module. So stay tuned on that front as well. We also have a number of supporting case studies, and even the word case study may be a little bit generous. It's, relatively speaking, based on the budget of the project, these are very, very small items. But the hope for this exercise was that, the water plan, of course, is a big kind of overarching, wide-ranging document. But how can we try to get more information on some of these other priorities that are in the water plan? How can we start dialing into some of the technical details on things like, water markets and economic impacts of different shortages and droughts, reuse issues, alternative transfer methods, which we've done a number of studies on, of course, and then different storage opportunities throughout the state. Those things we're still really working on the scoping details on those, so that's another thing to stay tuned on. We don't have a whole lot of those details to present today, but I just wanted to let everyone know exactly where we're headed with that. And with this, I'm going to hand over to Russ Sands in our office, who's been doing a great job really working on the whole project, but especially on some of this outreach and where we're headed with a lot of this.
Morning, everybody. I would say Greg's too kind. It's really a team effort. We have an amazing team that we work with at CWCB, of course, all the roundtable support, and a great slew of contractors that are working on this project. I just wanted to at least touch on the fact that we're really actively working on our communication plan and really trying to listen. And when I say we're listening, I don't mean in that creepy big brother way where we're checking your cell phones. I mean, we really want your input to make this stronger. So we've done some focus groups around the state, and some things that we heard were around SWSI that there's some confusion. So some of this concept of rebranding and how we package things together and really centralize around the water plan has kind of come out of this concept that we want to better tell the story of what SWSI is, how we communicate it, how it can be used. And to provide a toolbox of kind of informative pieces that roundtables could use or anybody could use to present on this, for example, or to message it. So kind of having a toolbox of some of these branding and tools that we would provide. Another piece of this is it's only as good as it is accessible, right? If we come out, I think, what do we say the water plane is? 4.5 pounds, something like that? If we put out another 5-pounder, it may not get read. So we're trying to think about how we can do this in an effective way and really show this and make it interactive. So we're looking at ideas around how we might be able to kind of visualize and make these really big concepts a little bit more accessible, of course, across each of the scenarios. And so we've kind of got this phased outreach approach that we're looking at that kind of takes us through the next year and beyond. So I'll walk through that a little bit. We've covered, we're right in the thick of the modeling right now, so there's a ton of work. Ooh, the chime's up, okay. We're right in the thick of the modeling. We're gonna be taking this, stay tuned for the exciting roadshow that's coming across each of the roundtables to really dive into some of this a little bit more. We're working on this data visualization piece I mentioned, and then as Greg alluded to, in December, we're looking to at least start to release some of the population data and some of the, maybe the first tool around costing. And then we'll start to trickle out data all the way out to the next phase, which is the release of the SWSI report in July. So some things that we'll be working on at the beginning of the year that we're hoping that also allows some other on-ramps for you guys to participate in the process is to really look at, as we're getting this data out there, what are the most effective ways that we can communicate with you all. Some of this stuff, there will be many appendices in addition to whatever the ultimate weight of the report is. There will be a weight of appendices, and so digging through that technical piece, is it better to do some technical webinars that are specific to each of the topics within SWSI and some of the things that Greg covered. We're also thinking about a working group, an implementation working group that we would look to start and maybe have a 6-month run that would kind of take 3 months and maybe have a monthly phone call that would first start to tackle some of the implementations of pieces of SWSI, maybe start to touch on what would be most helpful in a toolbox, and then rapidly transition to what we kind of see as this holistic thinking of not just branding around the water plan, but really holistically thinking about the next steps. So how do we start to transition into Basin implementation plan updates? And so we would like the working group to kind of help inform that process. So again, the report would come out, we're aiming for July of 2019, and then we really want to think about beyond that. So we've again, listening, we've heard a lot from stakeholders about wanting to have a Basin Roundtable Summit, a statewide summit. So we're looking at September of 2019 to hold a statewide summit that would kind of be that launching pad, I guess, in some ways for SWSI report came out, here's how you might use it, and start to incorporate some of the things that we've heard and we want to get out there to help with Basin implementation plan updates. And then just other engagement opportunities. One thing that we heard in the focus groups too is, are there groups that we aren't reaching out to or other ways that we can engage the public? So we're trying to dream up what cool opportunities there might be in terms of, maybe helping us with data visualization idea or holding a contest or other ways that we could engage the public or different stakeholders. So at this time, with as Greg said, we're not going to make it the poll everywhere, but if you guys could, at some point, whip out your phones, and we'll probably get this up on the Colorado Water Plan website as well as CWCB website. But if you could go to bit.ly survey, there's a short 7-question survey. It's really quick, but the reason that we didn't opt for the poll everywhere option is we really wanted some text boxes for user feedback. If you don't just want to do the yes, no, and you have some additional feedback, we want to hear it. And we'd rather hear it now so that you guys can help inform the process moving forward and we're not a year down the road and have missed the boat on something that's important to you all. So it would help us out. And if you want to be a part of this process, we'd love to have you. So ending this presentation where we started off, we've got a long timeline and we're looking out to the future how to make this successful with a lot of on-ramps for engagement, and just appreciate your time today and look forward to talking to you more in the future.